We want to look beyond the statements and the rhetoric of this summit and get some analysis. And so we are joined here by Martin Wolf. He's Associate Editor and Chief Economics Commentator for the Financial Times of London. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's a great pleasure.
The markets have reacted, at least positively so far, to the announcements coming out of the G20. Do you think that the promises in London will mark the beginning of the end of this financial crisis we've been in?
I don't think the promises themselves will mark the beginning of the end, but maybe the event will. It's just conceivable. So if you look at what has been decided already, most of it already known before they got together, including some of the things they have decided here, increasing the funding of the International Monetary Fund to help hard-hit emerging countries. And you look in addition at the other things that have been happening, above all the huge expansion of monetary policy that has been going around the world, the stimulus programs that were already in place, particularly here and in China. It is at least plausible that we are going to begin to see a recovery towards the end of this year from what is, however, still a very deep recession, and this will without any doubt be the worst year for the world economy since the 1930s.
How difficult do you think it will be for these G20 nations to turn their words into actions?
Well, some of what they promised, I'm sure, and much of it will indeed happen. The fiscal stimulus programs are pretty well decided. They haven't added anything significant to that. The money that is promised for the International Monetary Fund, which is going to be apparently $750 billion, up from the $250 billion before, I'm sure that will be there. So these things will happen. They will have made promises to avoid protectionist measures. I think they've done a very bad job of sticking to those commitments before now from the previous summit in November here in Washington. So I'm sure they will do equally badly this time. The financial reforms that they've been talking about are big, complex, difficult. How much of that will ever happen, I don't know. They have talked about that after previous crises and nothing much has happened. So I think probably the answer will be some of the things will happen and some of them won't. But there is clearly a commitment to another summit, and that might keep the momentum going. And this whole discussion process among these countries is, and about 85% of the world economy, it's a big deal. For the first time, we are really trying to do this sort of job after a crisis, a very big one, with all the emerging economies.
Does everybody go home with something?
Yes, I'm sure that's why the communique is so long, apparently about 9 pages. Everybody has something they want, and everybody can go home and say they've got a victory. I think clearly the Europeans will go back and say they've got lots of regulatory promises, and the Americans and the British are now committed to regulation. The Americans will be able to say there's agreement on stimulus programs, and there's agreement on their suggestion for IMF funding. I think everybody will feel, certainly everybody important will feel pretty happy. They were heard. There will be something of theirs in the communique, and they've sort of agreed it together.
Quickly, what would be said about President Obama's leadership during this?
I think certainly in his one-on-one meetings, he's done very well with the Russians, very well with the Chinese. I've heard from British officials they're very, very impressed with his intelligence and charm.
Martin Wolf, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
It's a pleasure.